This episode contains rude words.
Welcome to another episode of the Practical Permaculture podcast. I'm going to keep it short and sweet today because I need to upload this before we potentially lose power and the internet. This is Cyclone Alfred time for anybody listening. I did want to say a huge heartfelt thank you to Elle from Australian Medicinal Herbs for sponsoring the podcast this season. This is our last episode of the season. Her incredible support has made it possible for me to keep this podcast going and growing into the future. So we are so grateful for her partnership. You can jump on www.australianmedicinalherbs.com.au to check out her full range of products. So without further intro, I will jump into the episode. This week I have Alyce Alexandra. She's down in Victoria. People might know her from her Thermomix business that she has with all her recipe books and products, but she's also very into permaculture and has an epic chicken setup. So stay tuned for all things chicken related. She also has goats, a pony. Her property is beautiful, and the way that she has structured her chicken city with doors and chambers, it's amazing. So have a listen and see what you think. Welcome to the Practical Permaculture podcast, your weekly dose of gardening, intentional living, and all things permaculture, served with a side of fun and plenty of great conversations. I'm your host, Alyce, and together we'll dig into practical tips, chat with experts, and explore ways to cultivate a more abundant, sustainable life. Let's get growing.
Hello.
Hi, how you going? Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for joining us.
There is nothing I like talking about more than chickens and permaculture, so I'm right at home today.
So this week we've got Alyce, which is confusing because I'm Alyce and you're Alyce. So I first came across your content and you back when I bought my Thermomix, which is, years ago now. I actually got given it as a work bonus, believe it or not. So, and I came across all your cooking books, and it wasn't until last month that I realized that you're into permaculture and you do gardening and you rescue animals and all these cool things.
Yeah, I try and keep the two separate a little bit, just because if you've got a Thermomix, it doesn't mean you care about all this permaculture stuff. But there's been a lot of people that have found me the way that you did and been like, hang on, I know you from a totally different context. So this is my side hobby that I absolutely love. Probably more than cooking these days, to be honest.
Yeah. Cool. Well, for those who don't know either of your channels, can you kind of just give us a little overview about who you are and what you do and your context?
Yeah, so I wrote a cookbook for use with Thermomix machines back 15 years ago. And at that point, that was just a hobby. I was studying law at university. I really wanted to be a lawyer. I wrote this book as a passion project and it ended up being quite successful. People really resonated with my cooking style and my recipes. And at the time, there were no good recipes to use with a Thermomix, in my opinion. So that really took off. And I think what my passion there, really tapping into it at its core, was I really believe in the power of food and how important home cooking is. And I don't love home cooking. I'm not someone that's I'm going to go bake to relax. Frankly, I don't see cooking like that. I actually see it as a bit of a chore, but I fully believe in the importance of it for individual health, for family relationships, for our relationship with the environment and farmers. And it taps into so many important aspects of life that by me inspiring people to cook, I really think that is life-changing stuff. So I connected with the appliance cooking after writing a few cookbooks for the Thermomix. I then went on to write a slow cooker cookbook. And I connected with the appliance cooking simply because I think these appliances are a way for us to have our cake and eat it too. So we can live in the modern world using these modern tools, but kind of in a back to basics way by cooking our food from scratch in them. So that's been my professional career, and probably how most people know me is the appliance cooker lady, the Thermomix lady, that kind of thing. And like I said, I love cooking and I believe in the power of it. But really my my favorite thing to do is actually grow the food or produce the food rather than cook it. So alongside the cookbook writing business, I have been very passionate about setting up what I call my garden ecosystem and growing as much of my own food as possible, which is veggies, fruit, eggs from chickens, and bees. So I have always had this as like my side hobby, but in recent times I've started posting more about it. So I think people are now like, oh, cool, you've got this other side situation. And here we are on this podcast now.
Yeah. And so where did permaculture first come into your life? Like, were you brought up with those principles? Did you kind of come across it in a book? Did it smack you on the face one day? Like, how did it appear in your life?
Yeah, I thought you'd ask this question. I was thinking about it. And I actually don't know. So the only thing that really I keep coming back to is my grandparents, my dad's parents were refugees from Eastern Europe after the Second World War. And they moved to Australia, didn't know anyone, didn't speak the language, and got this, small lot, but for a Melbourne backyard, had a decent backyard, and they grew so much food. They had all the established fruit trees. And when I was really little, I would spend a huge amount of time with them, and we'd be out there picking the apples, and then we'd cut the apples, and then my grandpa made these like frames that we'd dry them in the sun, and then we'd jar them up, and that'd be the snacks we'd have for the whole year. So that's kind of how I was raised. So I think that's probably, so I don't know whether it was like a nature or a nurture, but my whole life, honestly, I've loved it. And I don't know when the word permaculture came into my life, when I was like, this is actually what I'm about and what I'm doing. But very early on, I always loved the idea of something in the garden having, or something in life, actually, it's not even a garden principle, things in life having multiple purposes or multiple uses. And I see like time as such a valuable resource as well. So it's like, even in my life, like with my best friends, like we'll go for a walk every week and then we chat, but we're also exercising. And I feel like that's such an amazing use of time to kind of like tick both those boxes off. So I feel like I live the permaculture life. I don't know when and who got me onto the word and how I truly understood it in the philosophy that I do now.
Yeah. And have you done any permaculture training, or are you just all self-taught?
I did a course at Ceres, which is like I don't even know what you call it. Yeah, it's in Melbourne.
It's I've gone blank now. It's like a big food hub, isn't it? Like a garden and food hub.
Yeah, a garden and a food hub, and they also do education there. So I did what was called the urban farmer backyard kind of food course there. It wasn't marketed as a permaculture course, but I suppose effectively it was. And I did that. I did that maybe in like 2019 or 2018. So I was quite far on my own food journey by that point. I already had chickens, I already had bees, I'd already planted my whole garden out. But I did learn a lot there. And actually what I just loved was being around other permy people. Like, it was just the highlight of my week, sitting around at lunch and chatting, and everyone was as excited about all this stuff as I was. But that's actually the only kind of training I've ever done on the topic. A lot of it has been self-taught. And YouTube, I love YouTube.
I know, yes, that's the thing. There's so much information out there these days. And like, we've had this conversation with multiple guests that going to do a PDC is so intense. Like, it's 2 weeks. It's how do you possibly absorb all that information? When I did mine, it was over 4 months. Yeah, 4 months, which was good because it was every second weekend and you could kind of put it into practice. But these PDCs that they're doing that are 2 weeks, I just don't know how you even soak up half the information, because it's just so fast paced. And there's some concepts that you really kind of need to sit back and think about too, and understand how they kind of fit. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And like with seasons, you might be talking about something that's only going to be a summer thing, and then the course is over and you haven't even like lived the summer under it. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there's that whole thing about in permaculture, waiting a whole year to see what happens as well. So it's like, how can you do that in a course that's 2 weeks? Like, it's hard to implement it as you go. But yeah. And your garden's so inspirational. Like, having a flick through your Instagram, I was like, oh, the chickens! I want chickens so badly. But
They're the
Were there many
best.
things that you changed, I guess, once you kind of started learning more about permaculture or, watching YouTube? Were there things that you went, oh, I would have done that differently, or?
Yeah. To be honest, the thing I would have done differently is I would have made the whole thing bigger, which is crazy because you know how big it is. I am a very planned person. I don't do anything like spur of the moment. So when I built my garden, I had actually, like for years, I had read books, watched YouTube. I would sit there at night with like my notebook and I'd be like sketching things out of how I wanted to do it. And I feel like what I actually created is pretty on point with how I saw the vision. But the I think there are a few more elements that I could have added in the perimeter of the system, if this makes any sense. So I've got like a big
Yeah.
paddock, and then in that I've got my chicken compound. But around the outside, I wish I'd kind of added some kind of garden to that was like not inside the chickens, but not part of the paddock. Because there's like a lot of like water runoff that comes under there, and then we've got the walls that I could have used for like trellising and just little things like that. But to be honest, not hugely. But I think once you start this, you just want more, right? Like you want to grow more food and more plants, and it kind of becomes addictive in that way.
So how big is the chicken coop area? It's
I
not really a
think
coop. You can't call it that. It's like a palace.
no. I call it the chicken coop, but it is not an appropriate name. Like, I don't know what other than the chicken compound, which sounds like a bit negative. I think it's 160 square meters.
Yeah,
So
wow.
that's quite large.
And you just made it yourself?
Yeah, I did. Like, I designed it myself, but I did hire like a local handyman, really lovely man, and he came and like did the building part.
Yeah.
I think I could have done it eventually, but it would have taken me years and years and years. And I probably have a lot more building skills now. So I built that was built 11 years ago now. So like I've come a long way in my skills, and credit to him. Like it still looks and functions as brand new as what it was 11 years ago.
Yeah. So it's essentially like a netted, is it mesh or is it netting?
So the walls are sheet mesh. So they are very hardcore. And then the roof is like roll netting, a lot finer, but nothing's coming in the top, and definitely nothing's coming in the sides. So it's fully enclosed, which means predator proof from mainly foxes is the one that I'm contending with the most. Completely fox proof. The mesh actually goes down into the ground. So if something did try and tunnel under, they're going to hit the mesh. Although in 11 years, nothing's even tried. And then the roof also, like if an eagle came down, they're not going to get through. If a fox did climb up the side. And then the added benefit of that is actually all the crops I grow, I don't lose any to wild birds or possums, which is huge, right? Like I grow so many berries, and the whole berry harvest I get to collect because I don't have the wild ones coming in. And I do grow food on other areas of the property, just like a standard garden, fruit trees in the garden. And if I'm not on it with the harvesting, I lose. Like I literally can lose the entire crop. So having the protection from, it's like, again, it's a permaculture principle because it's protection from things getting in to hurt my chickens. It's keeping my chickens in, but then it's also stopping other animals coming in to eat the crops. So it was an investment in resources to create that kind of structure, but it does actually pay dividends in how much food I get to harvest from that space. It also pays dividends because the chickens, I never have to lock them in and let them out. So for a standard chicken keeper, and this, like with my life, I just cannot, like it would be so hard. So, most people, they let their chickens out at sunrise, they lock them back in at sunset. So you have to be there at that exact time each day. So for me, because the whole structure is enclosed and predator proof, I don't put the chickens to bed. They put themselves to bed in their house at whatever time they deem appropriate, and then they get themselves up in the morning and go about their business. So I will check on them every single day, me or someone else in my family, and, do all the, is everyone healthy? Is the water all topped up? Is the food all topped up? But I can do that at any time, like of day and night. So it just means that, when I travel to the city for work and these kind of things, like I don't have to stress about who's going to let the chickens out. So again,
totally.
build and big kind of investment. But once it was done, the flexibility, like I don't actually think I could keep 27 chickens if I didn't have it done the way that I've done it. Yeah.
Yeah. We want to do the similar thing. So our Labrador, when we were living at my mum's, got one of her chickens, and I think he was just trying to like pick it up and take it to us, but he was very not gentle with it. And so now he's done that, I don't think he'll play nice with chickens in general. And we've got lots of snakes here. So snakes are a really big problem with chickens where we live. So we want to do like an aviary mesh all around the outside of our chicken coop. But I think the number one question people have is, how do you grow everything with the chickens in there? Because they're notorious for not just digging up roots, but also like your berries. Aren't they just eating all your berries and eating all your produce? How do you kind of manage that and work with them?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think that's the first thing people always want to know when they're looking at my chicken structure. And what my theory was when I built this was like, chickens can be really destructive in the garden, right? They can ruin things, absolutely, but they actually have so many skills and benefits that we can harness. So it's like, how do we harness the power of the chickens without kind of getting their destructive side? And it's the destructive side that people focus on, whereas I was like, these can be my gardeners. Like, these can do so much work for me in the garden while I can provide an oasis for these rescue animals that, need it. So I was trying to think, how can we get the best of both worlds with chickens? So what my system is, despite it being 160 square meters, it's actually divided into 5. So it has a central room and then 4 rooms surrounding it. And the chickens live in the middle, and they stay in the middle 24/7. They've always got access to that, and that's where their house is and their feed and their water and the compost bins, and kind of, I call that my chicken courtyard. And then the 4 rooms around have gates. So you can open and close the gates at different times of year. So what I do is, at the moment, it's kind of the end of summer and all my crops are going nuts, right? You've got all your tomatoes, your zucchinis, all the fun stuff. So the rooms that the vegetables are in, the chickens are locked out of at the moment. The room with the fruit tree, my orchard room, they are in there at the moment. So those trees are, lush and green, and it's really good shade for the chickens. So they spend their days under the fruit trees, and when fruit falls, as inevitably it does, they get to eat that, which is great, because then I don't get any fruit flies or any kind of like wastage on the ground. And then I come along and harvest all the good fruit that's on the trees, and they don't fly up.
Don't fly up? No? I guess because they're so well fed, like why would they need to, I guess.
Yeah.
But
And they can fly. Like, I know they can fly that high. Like, they sleep in their house, like above my head height. So they can absolutely get to the fruit. I don't know if in 11 years, like, no one's done it. And they do get a lot of stuff falling. So I think their needs are met. So they spend their summer days in there. And then at the end of autumn, when the seasons turn and, the tomato crops are spent and the zucchinis are got powdery mildew and we're done with them, then I open the door to the veggie room and I let the chickens in there. I'll actually close the door to the fruit room, so I'll give that a bit of a rest. I'll open the door to the veggie room, and then they will go in, and then they will like annihilate everything that's left. So all the, like the broccoli leaves, for example, they love eating the broccoli leaves. So I've harvested the part of the plant that we want, and then they get to come in and harvest the part of the plant that they want. And they'll scratch up the soil, they'll eat the weeds, they'll poo everywhere, so they're fertilizing it. And then after about a month, I'll lock them out of that room again, and then that soil and that room is completely what I call turned over and ready for planting my winter harvest or like my cool season crops. So then once I lock them out of that room, then I might let them in the berry room over winter because there's no, action in that room. So then they can kind of do work over there, or, I can put them back in the fruit room over winter. It's about moving them when they start to hit that destructive point, or actually when it comes to the veggies, I want them to be destructive. Like I want them to kind of get that room turned over and ready for me to plant again. So I can, and then, again, once I plant the winter crops, I'll lock them out and then the cycle continues. But by having the different rooms, I can move them where I need just by opening and closing a door.
I think it's really about understanding the animals' like behaviors, their needs, what they produce, and then how to make that work in harmony with what's going on. Because I think a lot of people just let chickens go through their orchard, and then they go, oh, now they're being destructive. But I saw on your Instagram, that you've got bricks down so they don't scratch up in the areas you don't want them to, but they can still access weeds and grubs and get rid of all the pests and do that. So it's an amazing stacking of function that is in there, and I think it's so clever. Because and I don't like the idea of free range chickens either, because like you said, it tires you down. It tires you down to having to be at the property all the time to make sure they're safe, to let them in and out and all that kind of thing. So we're looking at similar kind of either a tunnel system where they can get to different areas, or potentially a big cage if we can afford it. We probably won't have 27 chickens like you, so it could probably be a bit smaller. But and are all your chickens rescues, or?
Yeah, pretty much. Like,
so cool.
I have purchased one for some strategic reason. Like sometimes I've had a pure breed that doesn't have any friends, so I'll buy one of that breed to put in with it. But like, I'd say 25 out of 27 are rescues. And there's a lot of chickens that need rescuing. So I would highly recommend people do that. And like, I get plenty of eggs as well. So it's not like some of them, I've rescued plenty of chickens that have never laid an egg, and that's fine. But, plenty of them do. And the kind of the whole system like works in like that. But
do you have to supplement any of their feed with pellet or anything else, or it's mainly just?
No, I do. They do eat pellets, and which they can free, like they've got tube feeders. They can eat pellets all day long if they wanted. And then they also get seeds, like a seed mix as a treat, and they get that once a day, like when I go visit them. But they do get a lot of their feed from the garden, and it's actually interesting, like in the peak of winter when there's kind of nothing going on for them to eat, I notice like the feed bill increases. And then say in autumn when I let them in the veggie room that they're going to turn over, like then there's hardly any pellets gone for that month. So the food bill really fluctuates depending on how much they've got access to. But I certainly spend, like I probably buy 20 kilos of food a month, like a 20 kilo bag a month. So I still am using a lot of food. But that's 27 odd chickens. So it's not I would say if you had 27 chickens and if you just had them purely on dirt, you'd be buying a lot more feed. They eat a lot.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And you've got some goats too on your property?
Yeah, so that was a new addition. So when I first built the chicken coop, I had alpacas around the outside, and they were meant to be my fox protection. So I rescued a couple of alpacas, Kath and Kim, and
Kath and Kim. I love it.
Yeah, they were beautiful. Anyway, bit of a sad story, but someone's did not keep their dogs locked in, and they got onto our property and they killed Kath and Kim, which was awful, truly awful. And I mean, it's a testament to the chicken coop though, because the chickens were all safe, but the two massive alpacas were not. And after that, I really was like, I can't get any more animals outside. Like it was just too sad. And became too stressful. So for a long time, I didn't have any like big animals. And then this pony came along, Tony, and he needed a home.
Tony.
Tony the
I love all
pony.
these names.
I know. So I didn't name Tony, but he had his name, and someone said like, "Oh, can you look after Tony?" And I was like, "Oh, Tony." So I was like, "Oh, okay, yep, let's bring back the animals." So I got Tony and loved Tony.
Yeah.
But then Tony needed a friend. And then the other issue I had was around the perimeter of Chicken City. I was getting a huge amount of wild blackberries growing, and they are just the weediest, most awful plants. Like, I hate them.
Are they
And,
edible?
you might get like 2 tiny berries on them that are this big.
Yeah.
Like, they are edible, but they're just such an invasive species, and they just take over, and the thorns are awful. And anyway, I think because Chicken City had, so much lushness,
Fertilizer.
water, fertilizer,
Yeah.
the blackberries. So anyway, what eats blackberries? So I'm like, I've got a blackberry problem. In a permaculture world, you got a blackberry problem. How do you solve it? So then I was like, goats eat blackberries. Tony needs a friend. And Tony was doing a really good job of eating grass on the property. So Tony had his role with the grass, and his poo was obviously good fertilizer, and I loved him. So he's ticking 3 kind of boxes. And then I had this blackberry problem. So I thought, okay, let's get a goat. Goat and horses are usually friends. So then they can go well together. So then I got Remy, the big goat, and he turned up, and I completely fell in love with him. Goats are the best animals. Like, once you've had goats, you'll never not have goats, because they are just so funny and loving and affectionate and cute and hilarious. Anyway, so I got Remy, and then he was doing a really good job of eating the blackberries. There was a lot of stress when I got Remy, because goats and fences, that's a whole nother topic. But I had the fence in the paddock. The fence was fine for Tony the pony. No issues. I'm looking at my fence going, no, there's no way a goat could get through this. I'd had Remy for like an hour, literally, and he climbed over the fence. And he's a big fat goat. Like, he's like 100 kilos with this like huge gut, and he's just like scaled the side of the fence and gone over. And I was like, oh shit. So it was like, there was so much stress. I wasn't even sure if I could end up keeping him, but I was already in love by that point, so we had to make it work, and we did. That's a whole other story. So then we got Remy, and then Remy and Tony became best friends, which was super cute. But goats are super pack animals, and as much as Tony was his bestie, I think Tony was like happy with a bit of personal space. Remy was not, and Remy would be like super anxious anytime he couldn't see Tony. And so I thought, I think we need another goat who can be Remy's like bestie attached friend. Yeah. So then I just put the feelers out to a few animal rescue places that I get. I've got plenty of my animals from, and just said like, hey, I'd like open to another goat. And then November last year, so like 3 months ago, they contacted me and said, we've got this little baby girl goat who was found like wandering the streets in some country town. We don't know where she's come from. We don't know how old she is. She was still like she was still on milk. So it was like she wouldn't have lasted long on her own. So we got her, and we bottle fed her, and then now her and Remy are best friends. But it's funny because he's like huge and she's just tiny, and seeing them get around. And then this is perfect. Cool. Tony's got his space, but he's also got his friends, and the 2 goats are inseparable. So now I feel like the system is kind of complete, which is good, because there was a lot of emotions of like, what do I get? How do I get it? How do I make this work? But the grass is taken care of by Tony. The daisies and the blackberries are taken care of by Remy and Ruby. And then they all poo, and I use all their poo back in the garden.
What a good little system.
Answer. It works really well.
And as long as it's working, like.
it's a lot of work. Like it's a daily, like there is not a day off. And luckily, like my dad's partner is amazingly supportive. She does so much stuff. My mum comes over and does stuff. Like it's not, it's a lifestyle, not a hobby, you know, like, because there really isn't a day off. So I'm quick to say, like, you need a support network around you with animals and plants like that, because you know you can't, it's not like a hobby like knitting where you're like, I'm just not going to knit this week. Like those animals depend on you for their survival, so you got to be there.
And how did you first get in contact with all the rescue places, and like what was that process like? So I've never done anything like that before.
So when I first wanted the chickens, I wanted to rescue chickens, but I actually didn't even know how to go about it. And I would like Google it and I wasn't really getting anything. So I ended up buying my first like batch of chickens, which were just 6 back in the day. I didn't envisage having as many as I ended up, but love them, and you got the space, you just take them.
Yeah.
So I bought them, and I wanted rescues, but I didn't know how to go about it. So I put myself on Pet Rescue. That it's like a website mainly used for cats and dogs, but they do have a section on it for other animals. So I had a Pet Rescue alert that said if anyone comes up with, like if a chicken ever comes up, I would get an email. So these 2 chickens came up and I got an email, and I contacted and I said, yeah, like I'll take them. Like, yep, great. My first rescues. So, and you know, rescue places are very, they want to make sure that the animals are going to a good place. So they kind of were asking me all these questions, and I'm sending photos, and we kind of established it. Anyway, then I went out to the rescue and met them. And this is going back so many years now. And then we just developed a relationship from there. And I just said to them, like, I'll, you know, if you've got chickens and I've got space, I'll take them. So once they kind of had that relationship with me, every time they get chickens, they'd just send me a little message on Instagram and be like, what need chickens? And, you know, often I can't take them, but often I can.
Yeah.
And then and then that was actually who Remy and Ruby the goat came from as well. So that was like, it was just like once I had that relationship. And then I don't know if it's over time things have changed, or whether the more you're in something, the internet gives you what you're looking for. But now I notice like a lot of like rescue organizations on Facebook pop up for me, and Instagram. So if I wanted to rescue any animals now, I feel I have ample access. It's just a matter of finding people that like are local to you. But Pet Rescue was a really good way to do it. And I have rescued other chickens from other organizations on there. So that would be like a really good place to start. And they are, what also happens often, these I find quite hard to pick up on. Like I often hear about them once they're done, but like a caged egg facility or a free range egg facility will often do like a surrender. So they don't keep chickens much past 18 months in commercial, and then often they'll be killed after that. Chickens have got plenty more eggs to lay and plenty more life to have after that. So they do these kind of surrenders, and it's kind of like you got to be there at a certain day, you know, with a box or a cage to get your chickens that way. So Facebook tends to be where I see those come up. So if people wanted to, just scour that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's cool. Jo, who podcasts with me, she rescues a lot of chickens. I think she's the same. Like she's got her little network of doing it, but I'd love to find somewhere up here once we get ourselves sorted to, definitely rescue some chickens and get them. And yeah, it'd be lots of fun. Is there any anything you should look out for when you're doing this, like in health of the animals and things like that, or?
Look, often they look pretty terrible when you get them because they've been in confinement where they've like rubbed off their own feathers or pecked off their own feathers, or other birds have pecked off their feathers. You know, when birds are stressed, they'll do that. So they often look pretty awful when you get them. But honestly, it does not take long. Like, give them a bit of love, give them a bit of sunshine, like give them some dirt to scratch in, and they actually transform so fast. It is remarkable. Like, I often don't take photos when I first get them because I find it a bit like upsetting, but I should, because it's like 3 months and it's a totally new bird. So I wouldn't let what they look like be any determining factor in whether they'll kind of spring back to life. And honestly, actually, I think in some ways it's easier rescuing chickens, because when you buy chickens, you often buy them very young. So a few issues here. Young chickens, if they're particularly young, they still need heat and brooders and special feed, and there's like other issues that can go on, or like it's a lot more work. They're also often not sexed, so you don't know if you're getting boys or girls. So at least when you're rescuing, you know they're girls, because that's a whole nother discussion about like the hen rooster situation. So by getting them older, you kind of eliminate a lot of the baby problems, the gender problems.
And I imagine like integrating them into the flock would be easier too, because if you've got younger ones with older ones, like the older ones pick on the younger ones, I guess, and there's like a bit of a, settling in period for them, whereas the ones that are, rescues are older anyway, and they just kind of integrate, I guess. Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, definitely. Like if you were getting baby chicks and you're trying to put them in with an established flock, that was just, you're right, that's going to be a complete disaster. So having chickens of like equal size and introducing them. And honestly, I find the rescues, like, they're so easy. I feel like they've had such a terrible life that they're just so happy to be there.
Just grateful. Thank
Yeah,
you.
no, honestly. And like, like if I've got to pick them up to like, check them for lice or do any treatments or whatever, they're just like so much easier. Whereas I find ones that I've raised from young, they're like a bit sassy, like, so I find the rescues just delightful. So
yeah, cool.
I've heard people say like, oh, I'll buy chickens at the start and then I can go to rescues later. I don't reckon that's necessarily valid. I think the rescues, especially when it's an egg farm that's, getting rid of them at 18 months. Like 18 months is still very young for chickens. So in that case, like, go for it.
Yeah, so good. And so you hosted or co-hosted a podcast for a while, and you had a lot of beginner tips and things like that you shared. What are some of the things that you would suggest for beginners to kind of look to?
Oh, with chickens or with gardening generally?
Either. So the podcast was called Rooting for You, wasn't it?
Rooting for You, yeah. And it was mainly gardening, like growing veggies. I think probably the biggest mistakes I would say I see people make back then when we're going for like a really beginner approach is planting at the wrong time. So, maybe where you are, you could get away with this, but where I am, it's very cold. And if you're going to plant a tomato in the middle of summer, it's never going to get to fruiting period before it gets too cold. And I feel like then people are like, oh, like I didn't get tomatoes, that was a disaster. And it's like, you were kind of always going to fail. Like you could never make that work. So I think being very careful about the timing is a really big beginner one. And also growing things in too small of a pot is another one I see. So again, your tomato example, if you've got some super small pot, it's never going to be able to like do its best work because you didn't give it the resources. So I much prefer people growing in the ground if possible. I hardly grow anything in pots. There's a few little things and I can, like I've got my reasons for it. But all in all, I would say get it in the ground or in a raised garden bed. I consider in the ground, but just not in a pot. And the third one I'd say for a beginner is be really careful about sun. So, crops that need a lot of sun, they really need a lot of sun. Like I think people underestimate what the definition of full sun is. And like what we were talking about earlier with permaculture is what is full sun in summer, that might be full shade in winter, just depending on the lower position of the sun. So I think that's probably one of the mistakes I made early on was I saw garden beds I had that were super sunny in the middle of summer and I kind of thought, oh, that'd be a good place to grow crops in the cooler season as well. But then with the sun being that bit lower, and I've got some really big trees on the property, I actually found entire garden beds in winter were never in sun. So I
That's
really,
me.
yeah, and that's a hard one. Like, I think you want to be super cautious of that, because you just you just can't be successful growing
Yeah.
vegetables
Yeah.
without enough
And
sun.
because it's a new block for us, like we just had no idea. So like take my best guess and that's where it's going. And then by the time winter came down, I was like, oh wow, like the canopy of that tree like completely blocks that bed out. And most of what we've done is temporary because I wanted the ability to kind of see for next year. But
Mm,
I said to my husband, I have to go take photos and I have to document this because I'm going to forget next year and I'm going to make the exact same mistake or go, oh no, it wasn't here, it was over there. And then I've wasted a whole season again. So, yeah, that's something we're really conscious of. And I think pests is a massive one. Like people get really frustrated with pests, and it's kind of a twofold thing, isn't it? It's like that biodiversity and having systems and ecosystems like your, chicken setup where you're managing the pests. But it's also like pests that you don't have control over, like possums for us are a
mm,
really big problem. And
mm,
little like rodenty rat things that come and eat all of our pumpkins. So, and some of those things are a little bit unavoidable unless you're going to fully protect them from those animals with physical structures.
mm. And that's what I've done for a lot of animals. But rodents, I still get plenty of rodents in the chicken
Yeah.
coop, and sometimes they do eat my crops, and that is so frustrating. So I definitely feel you there. I think the approach I've come to after all this time is, because I like, it was just so disheartening when you spend all this effort planning something and something eats it. Um, the approach I've kind of come to is, as long as in a season I'm getting some really good wins, I have to expect some losses. So, like my nashies, I have this beautiful nashi tree, not in Chicken City, elsewhere. And last year I got hundreds and hundreds of nashies, and I was just so happy. And then this year I had all these little nashies on the tree, and I'm thinking, this is going to be great. I'm going to get my nashi harvest again. And then something came along and like literally ate every single nashi. I think it was
Oh
a rat.
no.
And I was so disheartened, and I just had to think, okay, but you had a really good berry harvest this year, and you had a really good, you've had more cucumbers than you've ever had, and your plums are going really well. So I think it's so frustrating, right? Because you want to have control over these things and you just don't. And you do one thing one year and it gets perfect results. You do the same thing the next year and it doesn't. So just thinking of it as a more holistic system makes me feel a bit better about it, because
Yeah.
otherwise you'd get too frustrated.
I
But
know. We had a massive hailstorm and we had all these tiny little citrus flowers coming on and all this stuff that was starting to like finally get there. And the hailstorm just wiped everything out, and everybody around here just, we didn't get good harvests of certain things because of the hail. But, it came out of the blue. There was no real weather warning for it. It was such an isolated little hailstorm. So like, what do you do? Like, you can't, like you said, you can't control it.
it just makes me like appreciate food so much more, and like value farmers, and see this as like important, not as a hobby, but actually for survival, because like we don't have control over this. And the fact that we can just walk into a supermarket and get access to so much food is amazing. And I feel like until you grow it, you really can't fathom the amazingness of it, because you see that, we don't have control, and so many variables go into it. And if one little thing goes wrong, your whole season, your whole harvest is ruined. Like, as someone that has a business, if my business was determined on such factors, like I would find that so hard. So,
Yeah,
hats off and full respect to everyone that grows food, for other people as a
totally.
living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you got any upcoming projects or expansions to your little property that you're working on?
It's a little one, but I'm quite excited by it. So I've been trying, and succeeding, to cultivate more of my own chicken feed. And one of the
Oh,
ways I've
cool.
been doing that, so I have the downpipes off the chicken house and off the goat shelter and everything, I have them going, all that water going into these big IBCs. I mean, they're not big IBCs. IBC is a standard size, just an IBC.
Got lots of
they're going
IBCs.
lots of IBCs, yeah. So I've got it sitting in that, and I like that. It's not the water I use to do my daily activities, but I just like it that if the pump broke, from the main water tank, I've got access to water there and etc. So, but, I thought it really needs more of a purpose. So what I've been doing is growing Zola and duckweed in the IBCs. Yeah, so these are like an edible, I don't think humans eat them, but animals love them, an edible water plant that is really high in protein. And the chickens absolutely love it. So what I do is I grow it in the IBCs using the runoff water, and then I kind of like get a bucket, scoop some out, and then put the bucket in with the chickens, and they like eat it up. And then it replenishes itself. So I haven't done it long enough to feel super confident in the system and be like promoting it, but so far it's going really well. And I bought like a $10 bag of duckweed, for example, and it just keeps proliferating. So that's a pretty easy way to grow a high protein food for the chickens. So
cost effective.
Yeah, definitely. My only hesitation is like when there's a big frost here in winter, which is inevitable, will it kill it? Do I need to cover it?
Yeah. Because whereabouts are you exactly?
We're in the Macedon Ranges in Victoria, which is like quite high up in the mountains. It's probably like a similar climate to Tasmania. So pretty cold. Like when I'm doing my planting guides, like when I read books on planting, I'm always reading Tasmanian guides because that is like aligns with my season. So it's probably like 5 to 7 degrees cooler than Melbourne at any given time. So it's hard. It's hard. I get very jealous of your warm weather up there and the ability to grow a lot.
It has its challenges too. Like, we get so much humidity. So, there's, obviously picking different varieties, things that are more subtropical, tropical plants, they can cope with it. But like zucchinis, I used to grow crap loads of zucchinis at my mum's place, and we'd be pickling them and preserving them, making cakes out of them. I have gotten 5 zucchinis all year. Like ridiculous, just powdery mildew, smashing stuff. I mean, our system's not set up here. Like we don't have the biodiversity. We're starting from scratch. The soil's not great because we're starting from scratch. Like we have all these other factors as well. But I've just noticed such a big difference. And, we get these coastal winds every afternoon. So the soil just dries out. Like we have irrigation and the plants are still like, the soil's dry underneath. We've got morning and night it's on. So there's all these other different things that are hard, and like we don't get a lot of cold weather. So, Brussels sprouts and things like that, don't grow like you might have them. So I think there's always those, pros and cons.
You're totally right. And I appreciate that more the more I garden. Like you see that, like I can grow really good apples and cherries. I don't have like fruit fly. I don't get gall wasp on my citrus. Like there's pros and cons. But the thing that really highlighted it for me was I got a greenhouse, and I was so excited about my greenhouse.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to be able to grow so much food in my greenhouse. This is like the problem I've got in my cold mountain location. Anyway, got my greenhouse like 5 or 6 years ago now, and it's not huge, but it's not small. Maybe it's like 3 by 6 meters. Yeah, 18 square meters.
Okay, yeah.
And so I've got like propagation set up, but I've also got quite a few like big garden beds that I can grow proper crops. And I had all these plans for the greenhouse. But then what I realized very quickly is as soon as you take something out of nature and make it a controlled environment, you win some, but you lose some. And like the pests I get in there are out of control. The whitefly I get in there is out of control. The powdery mildew is out of control.
Yeah.
And it's that whole thing of everything works in a balance. And I thought, like, I just literally thought, oh, it'll just be the same as what I do outside, but in a warmer environment. And it's not. And I've got plenty of food out of it, but I would say it's not quite the success I had have wanted, because I'm having to learn to garden in almost a new climate. I wouldn't go that far, but
Yeah.
you know, like it's a new set of
Rules.
problems of rules. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
It's a new set of rules, and I feel like I'm a lot more advanced in the outdoor garden because I've been doing this for 11 years now, whereas in the greenhouse I'm only 5 years in, and I'm still learning what crops do well and how I need to manage these things. And you know, I think actually if I moved up where you are, for example, I think I would really struggle.
Even just like techniques, like for instance, you know, like at my mum's, I could just let my zucchini sprawl wherever I wanted, but I've learnt here that I probably should stake them and trim them back for airflow because it makes such a big difference. And you know, we went away for 3 weeks over Christmas to see family, and we had someone house sitting, but the tomatoes didn't get staked. And like at mum's place in Scones, not subtropical like we are here, you know, I could leave the tomatoes and they'd be fine. But here, without that airflow through them, oh my goodness, like it's just a whole set of different ways of thinking about things. And it goes to show how contextual gardening is and what might work for me here. Down the road, I have a friend who gardens and she has 0 possums because her garden's in her front yard where there's no big gum trees, where I've got my beds at the back because that's better for the sun, but it means that there's all these gum trees that the possums are living in. So, you know, even from street to street and little locations within our community are still different. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. And like a lot of people like say to me like, oh, what are the, you know, give me the plans for your chicken coop. I want to build exactly the same thing. Like, you know, if someone wanted to like, you know, go for it, I would love that. But I just can't imagine that it could ever be so cut and paste because, you know, my aspects, you know, my sun positioning, where my water's coming from, what surrounding trees I've got, so many factors that would make it completely different to, you know, probably literally my neighbor's place. Like you say, like in the same little community, you can have so many different factors. So I think, you know, it's one of those things like you got to try it out and see. It sounds like that's what you're doing. But what I would always say to people about my setup, and probably even like for you where you're at with your garden, is like, don't think about taking my whole design, but think about the principles behind it and how you can get the chickens to work for you. And getting the chickens to work for you might be in a completely different way than I got the chickens to work for me. But it's like, how do we harness the techniques, you know?
Yeah,
like
totally.
you could have a fruit orchard somewhere and then have a tunnel to it, and maybe the chickens get access to that during the days that you are home, and then they get locked back in those nights. You know, like there's ways that you can kind of like take the principles and make it your own on your own land. But like you got to try it out a little bit before you kind of know what you can take, and that's hard because you got to have patience.
And I'm not a patient person. Like I'm type A, need to have my shit together, have a plan, and be in control. So the garden is such a lesson in surrender, like so much.
I'm exactly the same. Like type A personality, everything has to be perfect. Like I get shit done like no one gets shit done. But I feel like the garden is my lesson. And like I say, in the surrender, that's the perfect word for it. Like when I was talking about losing my nashies, I was like, I got to just, you know, be at peace with this. Like we've got to get on with it. And it's an interesting hobby, especially when you add the animals into it, because in some ways it annoys me, like when I'm really busy with work or whatever, and I think like I can't just put it on hold. But then I actually think for me that's the biggest gift, is that I can't put it on hold. So gardening is like my meditation, I need it for my mental health and my happiness. So by having it be a living thing, it ties me to it, but it also means that I have to prioritize something that contributes so much to me. So I think I'm on a tangent, but
No, I think a lot of people would resonate with that.
Yeah,
I
for
think
the
a lot of
A-type
people resonate with that.
personality.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we've been chatting for ages now, so I'd better let you go. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. We'll put all your details on show notes if anybody wants to find you online. I didn't even realize you had a YouTube till you emailed me, so I'm going to put the YouTube on there, and I've been consuming that this morning too. So I'll put all your links up there and people can hang out with you online.
Thank you. And yeah, the YouTube's probably where I've got like the most in-depth information on the chicken setup. So if people are keen on that. And yeah, I really appreciate your time today. It's been so lovely to chat. And if you've ever got any more questions on your chicken setup when it's like, you know, in the next stages, I would love to hear and, you know, provide any advice. So, yeah, we'll stay connected.
That'd be amazing.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.